Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Material Matters with Grant Gibson. I've done over 120 shows now. However, for listeners who might be new to all this, the idea is that I speak to a designer, maker, artist or architect about a material or technique with which they're intrinsically linked and discover how it changed their lives and careers. Today, I'm hugely delighted to be joined by one of the stars of September's Material Matters Fair. Zena Holloway is a bio-designer and founder of Rootfull, which creates clothes, lights and sculptures out of grassroots. Interestingly, she started her career as an underwater photographer, doing extraordinary high-end fashion shoots, as well as working with the likes of Kylie Minogue, Daley, Katie Price and numerous other celebrities. At the same time, she was capturing the effects of pollution on our riverbeds and coral reefs. So how and why did her career shift so dramatically? I suspect I'm about to find out. Zena, hello, how are you?
Very good, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's okay. Was that intro reasonably accurate?
Yeah, it was.
Oh, good. So you were one of the exhibitors at this year's Material Matters, which took place in London during September. Have you recovered? You look pretty, constantly busy, actually.
Oh, yeah. It was a really good exhibit. I really enjoyed it. The visitors to Material Matters are just always interested, obviously, in materials. And that's what I love to talk about. And people are curious to find solutions to materials that we need to replace, really. So it's a really good exhibit space for me and for Rootfull.
Oh, good. Important to say, I did not pay you to say that. So good. I'm delighted. That's kind of why we do it. So excellent. So as you may know, we have a tradition on this show of asking guests to describe their studio. We're looking at each other on a kind of virtual studio on a screen. I know you're based in London, but what does your workplace look like? Are you overrun with plants? Does it resemble Kew Gardens?
So I have a live workspace in southwest London. The living area is upstairs and downstairs is a good sized open plan space. At one end, it's overgrown with root pieces that it's kind of more of a gallery space now. I position things at that end of the house that are complete, perhaps put them on plinths or put them on tables, hang them on the walls. It's just kind of a space for me to look and kind of understand things that I've grown. And the other spaces that I work in, there's two rooms. One room is traditionally called the camera room by my kids. It's where I've always kept the cameras. Okay. And it's stacked floor to ceiling with kit. It's now been kind of overrun with more root things. And I sometimes work in there as well to grow pieces. And the other room is my favourite room. And that has a glass ceiling and one glass wall. So it's very bright. And it has shelves on it which are stacked with all these objects that I found, natural objects, stones, natural fibres, sticks, feathers, all kinds of things that I just feel are going to be useful in the future but haven't found a use yet. And things that I've come across that I just enjoy looking at that just make great objects.
So you're a collector, in other words, Zena?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a magpie, but really only for natural materials. I'm not bothered by synthetic things.
Okay. Interesting. And are the kids at an age where they find what you do incredibly exciting? Or are they like, ugh?
Yeah, well, at the beginning, it was like, oh my God, Mum's growing root. Now they think it's really cool.
Okay.
Only now.
So they thought you were mad occasionally, initially?
Yeah, definitely. Right. Rolled their eyes constantly.
It's nothing like support from your own children, is there? Well, look, you create these extraordinary lights and clothes and sculptures out of the roots that we talked about, which are wheatgrass roots. These pieces are incredibly intricate. The obvious question to ask is how you go about doing it. What is your process?
So I carve templates from beeswax. Mm-hmm. I sow the seed on top of those templates. And what happens is the root grows down onto the template. It's looking for water. It's looking to bind in on itself because it grows better when it's a colony. And over the space of 2 weeks, it grows through the template and it takes on the shape of that template. So it's a way to manipulate the way the roots are formed. And after 2 weeks, I slice off the top bit. That's the seed and the shoot. I give that to my chickens.
Okay, because that's one of my questions. What you do with all that grass?
You can't waste anything.
So that goes to the chickens.
Yeah. And then I'm just left with the root at the end, which I dry out. Takes about a few days to dry, depending on temperatures. And then I treat it and form it possibly into different shapes for whatever object I want to create.
Right. Okay. What do you treat it with?
I treat it with a hot soup of ingredients that I mix up in my kitchen. I can't be too more specific than that.
Okay.
But it's non-polluting.
Non-polluting, but we're
non-polluting,
not... Okay.
Mostly natural, as good as I can get it to keep the material circular, sustainable.
Good to know.
And all those good things that you want it to be.
Can we talk about how you alighted upon wheatgrass? Because I'm guessing, well, in fact, I know there are thousands of different varieties of grasses that presumably you could have tried.
Yeah, I tried quite a few at the beginning. There are so many different strains. I mean, there's over 11,000 different types of grass seed out there, and each one will have a different root structure. So I tried growing with barley, oats, rye, wheat. I mean, numerous other seed tests, maize, all those types of things. But definitely grass is a thing that makes a very good root structure. It likes to bind together. Other roots tend to repel from one another. They fight for space underground, but grass is different. It wants to colonize. It wants to be one creature. So that makes it very useful as a material because it wants to bind together. So rye, for example, is at least the rye that I've been growing is a finer root and it's crinkly like wool. And barley is different. Barley I think it has an extra root hair on it. So I think there's a lot of potential for barley in the future. I didn't get very far with my oat test. I had a lot of seed latency on that. So I think there is also a future with oat. But
seed latency, for somebody who knows nothing about this subject, what is that?
It's just a term to describe the way that the seeds may all not sprout together.
Okay.
Which might be okay for a farmer who's growing it over a period of months. But because my process is very quick, it's 2 weeks.
Literally 14 days from planting the seed to, cutting and harvesting, whatever.
Literally 2 weeks. I mean, it goes back to kind of that biology experiment that we all do at school when you put the little seed on the wet cotton wool and you put it in the cupboard and the biology teacher says it will grow, even though it hasn't got any sunlight and it hasn't got any soil. That's essentially what I'm doing. I'm just growing it with water, no soil, and then harvesting it after 2 weeks.
And the beeswax, how did you come across the beeswax? Were there experiments or did you use beeswax straight away?
Oh, God, that was just, a very arduous process.
Well, let the listeners feel your pains.
So in the beginning, I had this idea that I could make a material from grassroot. And that process involved thinking about how to make the different patterns and forms, what I could grow on in order to direct it. I don't want to be buying plastics. I don't want to be contributing to the waste out there. So I was just using materials that were all around me.
Such as?
Gosh, anything from the kitchen with a relief surface. So all the, dishes, plastic, kind of any disposable plastics that would, grab my attention, I'd get those. My son's Lego.
You stole your own son's Lego?
I did. And I even paid him to build me some shapes. So and I grew it on different silicons, anything, silicone molds for making cakes and things like that. And I found actually the root really minds what it grows on. Some materials it repels against, like the underside of a typical shoe sole. It won't grow on that. It's got something in it. I don't know exactly, but it repels from it. And it also makes me wonder, okay, well, what happens to these materials when they go into landfill? How does nature respond to those? So when I discovered actually I could just grow it on beeswax, that was a Eureka moment because I realized I actually had a natural material that could be reused and it could become many different shapes. It was like, wow, this is a really good direction. This is exciting.
This is it. And you're carving the beeswax by hand, presumably?
Yes, carving the beeswax by hand. Sometimes casting it now because it's got quicker, but generally that's the way it all began.
So you have this template made of beeswax, which creates the root-based cloth, I guess is the best way to describe it, or the root-based material, so we call it. Presumably then, do you have to cut it to fashion it into your pieces? I'm guessing you don't grow them exactly the right shape, particularly the fashion pieces that you do. So planting is kind of exciting and I kind of get lost in it when I'm down
on the growing tables, because I'm looking at all these different templates and trying to imagine, with all the experience that I've had, how the root is going to grow around those templates. And I'm getting to a point now where I'm starting to layer it up. So layer up the templates, imagining, okay, there's going to be 10 centimeters there, 10 centimeters here, because that's how it's going to travel. And then thinking about the shape that I want to make. And kind of, you get that flat net shape, and then you have to imagine how that's going to twist and turn when you assemble it into a 3D object. And if you're talking about a fashion object, then you have to think about, well, it's going to be frayed on this edge because that's the way the root is going to grow out. And the root, it doesn't want to be grown in straight lines or corners. It's not restricted to a loom like we think of traditional materials. So it took me so long to kind of realize, actually, this material, if this is what it wants to do, it's a creature. I need to learn to collaborate with it in order to get the best shapes. But when I'm presenting it to other people as a flat material, if they're a designer, I would tend to cut those edges off because people can't process it as easily. If it's not a flat sample in a square shape, people are kind of thinking, well, what can I do with this? If it's got this, it's just easier to process as a flat shape in a square sample.
Sure. But when you're carving your templates, do you have a sense of what you want it to be when you're carving, in other words? You don't end up with a material and then decide to turn it into a light or into a collar or a dress. You're knowing what you're going to be making when you're carving the template.
So in the beginning, I didn't have an idea how the templates would turn out and what they would become. But now I carve and make templates to become the shapes that I'm imagining them.
Okay.
The objects that they will become. Yeah. So it's much more
informed. You're informed. This is almost tacit knowledge of how roots grow, which is kind of interesting.
Now I've got a PhD in root. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll talk about that. And also you can create different thicknesses, obviously, by using the template, I'm guessing.
Yeah. So what's super interesting about this material is it's not assembled with parts. It's almost like a skin. So you can grow areas which are thicker and areas which are more delicate. And because it's biodesign, it's like the skin on your face is thin and delicate and the skin on your back is thick, but it's all one organism. It's all one piece. So it's important that the shapes and objects that I'm growing have that ability to change over the space of the skin, over the space of the surface.
Fascinating. And you've been experimenting with colour. Well, not experimenting. You have pieces, you have colourful pieces now. And how do you get colour into that work? What do you use?
So I'm using natural dyes, which is an alchemy in its own right. They're not predictable particularly, but I kind of like that, actually. I use gallnut, which comes from the oak tree, which is high in tannin. So when you mix a pinch of iron with it, it goes from this kind of insipid yellow powder to this deep, deep black, which is kind of exciting. And I use madder. I use coreopsis, which is a yellow flower that makes an orange. I've been using lac from the lac beetle, although I prefer to use vegetable dyes. Lac is a really good color because it's very predictable. And indigo sometimes, but indigo is tricky.
Right. Why?
Because you have to make a vat. You have to remove all the oxygen from the vat. I did it with iron, and you get this clear liquid with a kind of sludge on the bottom. You submerge your root in it, and you kind of think, oh, that's not going to do anything. And then you pull it out, and then it turns blue, like in front of your eyes. It's just the most incredible thing. But if you touch the sludge at the bottom, it stirs it up and contaminates your dye. And actually, to get rid of all the oxygen in the vat is difficult. It takes, weeks, days, and you have to just get it just right.
Okay, so I'm intrigued. Say one of the lights that you showed at the fair, we know how long the grass takes to grow, fortnight, but subsequent to that, how long would a piece take to fashion, create, manufacture, make? Well,
if I grow a small piece or a football size pitch of grass textile, it would all take 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's not about the size.
No. But I mean, once you've got the material, then with the dye, you just dip it and then it's good to go? Or is there more to it than when the root is finished?
So after I've harvested it, I dry it, I treat it, and then dry it again and form it and shape it into whatever object. It doesn't really take that long, just the drying process, because I don't like to just like to dry it naturally with air dry. So that takes a couple of weeks.
Okay. The brilliant Ali Clifford, who has the hashtag of Incredibusy on Instagram, did a short reel with you at the fair, and it kind of blew up on social media. So I thought I'd do something I never normally do, which is read out a few questions from some of the comments that were below the line.
Oh, God. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So this is from Alicia, who wants to know, how do light bulbs not burn the material?
Oh, well, most light bulbs these days are LEDs. They don't really have much heat to them. So they're not really an issue any longer.
So that's no longer a problem.
Yeah.
This is from Sarbindar Sina. How would you clean the lights? This is the practical stuff that I'd never think of asking. So yeah. How would you clean them? I'm intrigued.
Well, weirdly, I don't clean the lamps. I've had lamps and root objects in my house for a couple of years, and they don't seem to attract the dust. But if they did, I would suggest a light vacuum with a soft brush, or just brushing it, or wipe away. Yeah.
Very good. And Mary Bluestyle wrote, so you sell kits? ? I mean, is that something you'd consider? Presumably anybody could do this with some instructions and a little know-how from you.
Yeah, they could. And lots of people ask me on Instagram. It's taken quite a lot of practice to do this. It's not going to be a quick fix. So kits may be possible in the future, but right now it's a bit beyond me.
Okay, so there you go, Mary. Now you know. Mary's question does lead to a question I have about scale. At the moment, it sounds as if you work in a crafty kind of way, but presumably there's nothing stopping you from scaling this up into a more kind of industrial process. Is that something you'd consider?
Yeah. And there's two parts of this material. One is the craft. That's the craft that I can create and grow and cultivate myself. And then there's the other side of this, which I would like it to be a material that could have a purpose in society, could reach a wider audience, could scale and become useful. I'm working with a grower up north who's growing tests for me, and he has capacity to grow hundreds of meters of root textile, and he's growing it regularly now. So yeah, it is a material that could scale, and I would like to find uses for it as a sheet material possibly that other designers could use.
Yes, I was going to ask what uses you possibly saw for it beyond the stuff you already make.
So I think it could be an acoustic paneling.
Right.
I think it could be used in fashion quite extensively. I think it can replace interior surfaces in the future, depending on the coating. A lot of it is to do with what it's coated with as to what the properties of the material become. But essentially, it's a natural fibre. It's like linen, wicker, like a straw hat. There will be uses for it. It's just a case of finding them. And, I really like the idea of collaborating with other designers, people who might bring a different view to this material, and to be able to suggest ways to grow it differently that would provide a use for it.
So how much of the material are you currently growing?
So I grow about 8 square meters every couple of weeks.
Right. And can we talk a bit about longevity? How strong is the material? I mean, I guess that depends on how you finish it. You might have already kind of answered that, really. But if I buy one of your lights, Zena, how long can I expect for it to last?
I see it like a straw hat, as long as it's kept indoors. It's a cellulosic fibre, so it's not going to degrade indoors. Stable. If you put it outdoors in the rain, it would degrade over time. And I've had samples outside, but just still there. I mean, birds come and peck on it, and bees come and buzz around it, and things eat it, but it's still there. It's stable.
Hope you're enjoying the show so far. It's just over a month since the Material Matters Fair shut its doors. My business partner, William, and I had a wonderful time, and we just wanted to thank the on-site teams and suppliers we work with, the speakers on our talks programme, all our wonderful exhibitors and sponsors, which included, and there's a bit of a list here, people, Coin Street Community Builders, the Wood Awards, our official acoustic partner, Woven Image, TP Bennett and the Furniture Practice, the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, the Embassy of Slovak Republic in London, Smile Plastics, which did our bar and reception desk, Elliott Wood, the Woolmark Company, Material Bank, Bankside Hotel, Tanqueray 10 for helping our late night go with such a swing, and Aqua Libra. And a final huge thanks goes to all the people that visited, all 6,000 of you. It was a very special few days. Material Matters will be back in London next September, so if you're interested in taking part, do get in touch at hello@materialmatters.design. That's hello@materialmatters.design. See you next year. One thing we haven't got into is how you discovered the process in the first place, because you were an underwater photographer, and that's something we're going to talk about a bit later. I'm interested to know why you went from that to creating a material made of grass roots.
So being an underwater photographer, I, over the years, have watched the plastic in the ocean grow and see just more and more plastic. And it just felt to me like a very, visual interpretation of what we're doing to our planet. It's just like every time I went underwater, there was just more plastic. And it felt like being a photographer was just being a witness to it, being, observing it. And I didn't want to just stand on the sidelines and watch. So I thought there are answers in materials. We just need to search for them. We need to find new solutions. So in 2018, I put down my camera and just thought, I don't really know what I'm going to do, but I'm just going to buy a book about materials and start learning. And then I found my way to biodesign, this idea that we can use living organisms to grow new materials, which is very, very exciting. Both, I like the narrative of it. I just think it's just such a perfect solution. So I grew mushrooms in my basement for about a year, worked with mycelium, grew some things for the dining table, some mushrooms for the dining table. That was good. I quickly realized though that I'd need a proper laboratory in order to do it well. And I'd probably need 10 years of my life to figure out even the tiniest, amount of knowledge that mycelium contains. This is this vast subject. So my head was in that place of looking at, the roots of the mushrooms. And then I just sidestepped, and I was in the water one day just doing a river cleanup, and I saw these roots of a willow tree that were growing, and they were bright red. And I was looking at them through my camera and thinking, wow, that looks a lot like natural fiber. It's just a bigger version of what I'm seeing with the mycelium. So I thought, okay, I wonder what I can do with plant root. And that was really the beginning. And then I started to look at other people who had been growing with plant root. I saw a project that Carol Collette had done.
Yes, she's been quite pioneering with this kind of work, right?
Yeah, with biolace. And she was, I don't know if she actually really grew it or whether it was just a theoretical idea, but she proposed that we could be growing materials from plant root in the future. And I just thought, I bet, we can do that. No problem. And I just thought, I'm going to have a go. Yeah, it took me a while, but I got there.
I should say that Carol is a professor at Central St Martin's and ran the Textile Futures course for many years and has been there doing other things subsequent. Can we talk about your background? Because you were born in Bahrain. I'm intrigued by your name, Zena. Is that where the name comes from?
Yeah, my father was a pilot for Gulf Air. My mother was an air hostess. And my mother tells me that, when I was born, he went to the local library. They thought I was going to be a boy, and they weren't prepared with girls' names. And he went to the local library, and Zena was the best of a bad bunch, my mum tells me.
Well, he came back with a bunch of names. It was interesting. He was looking at Z. I'm quite intrigued by that as a letter to start with.
Yeah.
She never told you some of the other names he came back with?
No.
And was your household creative? Were you making things, playing with materials as a child?
Always. My father died when I was still a baby.
Oh, I'm sorry.
My mother didn't, she's a very creative person, but she never channeled it into making objects. She'd cook and make amazing cakes, but that was really as far as it went. And I was always had, constructing dolls, constructing murals on my bedroom wall. I once created a vine that traveled all the way up one wall in newspaper and then over the ceiling and then branched out. So it became kind of a ceiling piece as well. And I painted it, and it was still there when we moved house. So I don't know, it's probably been pulled down by now.
Very good. And what were you like at school? Did you grow up in Bahrain?
So when my father died, I came back to the UK, and I went to boarding school, and probably teacher's pet because I like learning, but I was also described as the naughtiest girl in school because I was very good at getting away with things and being quite naughty, raiding the larder and not getting caught.
Was it strange coming back to England, I wonder, after growing up in the Middle East?
Well, I was only there as a baby. I've never been back since. Well, I lived in Egypt for a while, but I didn't really live for very long in Bahrain.
Reading a little about you online, you seem, quite determined to do what you've done. You have to have a huge degree of determination. And also, if you don't mind me saying, quite self-contained. I don't know if that's true, but you didn't go to university, for example, and instead you traveled. You mentioned Egypt. You traveled to Egypt, became a scuba instructor, and then you discovered this fascination with underwater photography and taught yourself how to use a camera. So you didn't go on a course or anything. It was all trial and error, the way you learnt to use a camera.
Yeah, I finished my A-levels and I had a place to study architecture at university, but I went scuba diving in that space after A-levels. And I was in Egypt and I was just underwater thinking, oh, well, this is the place to be. I don't want to go back to the UK. And after traveling there on holiday, I stayed there a year, became trained as a scuba instructor, and then the camera, the photography, all of that kind of grew out of just being underwater all the time. And there wasn't anyone to teach me. If there had been, I probably would have gone and done a course, but I just remember flicking through a book and just getting on with it. And
did you immediately think you could make a career out of this?
I think at 18, I wasn't really sure what I was doing. I was just enjoying not being in school.
Yeah, no, fair enough. But at some point you must have decided, I can make a living doing this.
Yeah, I think if I think back to the very beginning, when I learnt to be a scuba, when I first got my scuba ticket, like at age 16, the instructor that was teaching me, he worked on the Abyss and he had a picture of the Abyss, the film set, on the wall. And I remember thinking, wow, that's so cool. And it wasn't really any more than that. But then when I then was out in Egypt, underwater, I suppose those memories were coming back and I was thinking, maybe at some point I could return to the UK and work in that industry.
It just interests me because going back to what you do now, it seems to me that creating this material has been quite a singular affair. I often talk to people on this podcast working biomaterials and they've been to design school and they've collaborated with scientists, but you've done all this by yourself. You aren't flitting in and out of Imperial College or anything like that. You are genuinely autodidactic. That's my favorite word. I've been wanting to get that into this podcast for ages. But you're very self-taught.
Yeah, it just happens. I suppose it's just this eternal optimism that I think I can do it. And I just feel if I chip away at the block long enough, it will become what I want it to become. And it's just a case of being determined, putting my head down and just getting on with it. And I also think that if I teach myself, if I learn on my own rather than through other people, I'm just going to end up in a more interesting place. I'm not relying on existing knowledge. I'm imagining what could be. That's just the way it's happened.
It's really fascinating. The other thing I was going to ask you about is that reading some of your interviews from 2022, because you started this in 2018, but certainly your press clippings seem to start a few years later than that. So it must have taken you a little while. But initially it seemed to me that you talked about it being like a statement to get people to think about different materials and the potential of biomaterials. But now it seems to me that this has changed and you're looking at, you can make products. This isn't a statement. This is something you can scale up and do things with.
So in the beginning, it was a bit of a leap because I was an established underwater photographer and I thought, okay, well, what I'm doing now is just so entirely different. I don't even know how to approach this. And it was kind of, I'm in the process of transforming, coming out into something I don't know what yet. So I had a number of years where I just kept it hidden. I was just playing with the material, seeing what it would become. And I didn't really know what to do with it. And then I just, a friend came over and she said, this is really good. You should post it. And I thought, well, I can't put it out as me under my name because I'm all about underwater photography. So I just created an Instagram page and just uploaded a load of images. I had no idea if people would understand what it was. So I just uploaded it and the reaction was really interesting. And I just thought, okay, people do get it. They do understand it.
And at what point did you decide, I'm going to spend all my energy on grassroots and give up the photography?
It's difficult because the underwater photography is such a big part of who I am.
Yeah.
And even now, I don't really like to say that I've given it up. I still feel that those skills, that kit is still there. I could just pull it out of the cupboard and get going again. And I love it. I love the underwater photography. I don't know. There was a turning point when I just felt I don't have the bandwidth to do both. I can't be an underwater photographer and develop this material. I cannot give myself completely to this material if I'm carrying that baggage behind me of being an underwater photographer as well. So I guess it was in 2021, I think just probably the material was getting to a point where I thought, this could be actually more than just a craft material. This could have a purpose. It could have a role. It could be useful to society. And everyone is looking for new materials right now. There has never been a better time to be a material innovator. And it feels to me that we're in a rare time in history when we have information at our fingertips. We have access to Google. We have access to all these books, all this information. There's no reason why one person can't develop a new material. It's all there. You just have to look for it. So I realized this material could be something more than just me. Maybe it has a purpose. It could serve society. It could become a way to recycle agri-waste, for example. Hydroponics, that industry is growing extensively because climate change and the need to feed world population. So a lot of it is going into glass houses. Often they are grown without soil, and all that root ends up mostly in landfill. So what is that root? Could be repurposed, could be reused, could become something useful. And that's kind of when I realized, actually, this is something that needs to be shared.
It's fascinating. I am going to concentrate for a little bit of time on your photography, though, because it is in and of itself pretty extraordinary. I mean, when I discovered you're an underwater photographer, I was thinking there'd be all sorts of shots of, I don't know, jellyfish and sharks. And you do shoots with creatures, but you also do, or have done, these high fashion shoots, which look extremely complex. I mean, you did this shoot in the underground river systems of Mexico with some models. I mean, the finished results are exquisite to look at. Did that require a huge team? It looks like a really high budget endeavor.
No, it's just me. It's me and a model. Yeah, it's me and a model. And I had a guy there who was just super helpful in kind of getting me to the location and just organizing how we were to get into the water, because the cenotes of Mexico are the most incredible body of water. They are, I think they're the longest underground river system in the world, and they all connect, and each one is different. And the rivers flow underground and occasionally pop up into these kind of sinkholes. So you often have to like leap down into the sinkhole and, into a small puddle of water, which then opens up below you into this huge cavernous spaces. And of course, because it's got this very small pocket of like light from above, you get the god fingers coming down, all that light traveling through into this dark space. So it is the most incredible, amazing, majestic underwater space. You just need a willing freediver, and then it's just fun. It's super exciting to be working in those kinds of spaces. Yeah,
I mean, they were made by an asteroid, seemingly, the underground caverns and things.
Yeah, so they were made by the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. They've pinpointed it to that place in Mexico, and what happened was the asteroid was so deep, so big, so hot, it melted the limestone. And it all became this underground river system, which is now the cenotes of Mexico. And each one is so entirely different. I mean, one of them has the fresh water running through it, and then it has a different temperature, or it's different saline content, I'm not quite sure, above it. So you get this cloud system. You're in the water, it's clear, it's crystal clear. And then at 30 meters, there's this kind of cloud below you, and then these kind of branches and trees that grow out of it. And I was with somebody who knew that water, and he said, whatever you do, don't drop your camera. It's hundreds of meters deep and you'll never get it back, basically. So although it looks like it's solid ground, it's not.
Yeah. I mean, you also did a project, I spent quite a bit of time on your website yesterday called Dreamweavers for How to Spend It, which is a very different kind of setup, because I presumed when we were looking at the Mexico shoot that it must have involved lots of people. I mean, it didn't. It was just you and a model. This did involve lots of people and a tank of water, 6 hours to set up according to the video, 8 hour shoot, 1,400 photographs, 9 underwater crew, 7 underwater cameras. I mean, I'm kind of intrigued. How did you get into this kind of fashion-based underwater photography? It strikes me as a pretty niche space.
Yeah, I think it grew over time. I mean, obviously it didn't start like that. It started with very small shoots, one person, one light in a very small swimming pool. But then what happened with the photography was that as I got better at it and I grew a portfolio, people started to commission me for those types of shoots. And then slowly you gather more experience, more knowledge. You work in bigger underwater studios. And London is a centre point for underwater photography. I mean, it's where they shoot the James Bond, the Harry Potter.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
We have a really good underwater studios, 2 really good underwater studios here. So I had access to wonderful underwater facilities, really good team of people who, again, kind of grew with me. We learned how to rig the lights. We learned how different lights behave. We learned how to connect the camera to the strobe system. And then I worked with some fantastic stylists who brought it all together. So it's kind of a group of people, a team of people that helped me. Well, we created it together, those kinds of shoots. And when, you get one shoot, you get another shoot because people see it. And it's a process that just keeps rolling.
Do you miss working with a team? Because what you do now, I'm guessing, is you're by yourself in a studio, in your home.
I like collaborating a lot. I learn a lot from it, but I'm also really comfortable being independent on my own, burying myself in root. I'm happy either way.
Fair enough. I can't not ask you about some of the celebrities you've worked with. You're shuffling slightly uneasily, I suspect, in your seat. But you're the second person, Zena, I've had on the podcast who's worked with Kylie Minogue. Emma Witter was the first.
Oh.
She works with Bones, interestingly. So there's a bio relationship there as well. What's Kylie like? What's it like to work with Kylie?
Oh, she was lovely. Very sweet. I was talking to her producer and there was a gaggle of people. And I'd been talking to the producer for, a couple of minutes. And then she just sort of appeared from behind him. She's very small. And I hadn't seen her originally. And she's lovely, very sweet.
And she can pop up everywhere, seemingly.
Yes, I suppose being small, that helps.
And Katie Price?
Oh, she's such a diva. Honestly, she was fantastic. She was always knowing where the camera was. And, she's one of those models who's just like a chameleon. You put the camera on her and she automatically knows what to do. The shoulders go down, the neck elongates, and she's got so much charisma. She was a lot of fun.
It must be quite curious because, you talked about Katie Price knowing how to use a camera, but a camera and water is different again, isn't it, for people, I imagine?
Yeah, and that's quite fun because lots of the models and celebrities who I work with, I've been told by my assistants who work with other photographers, they go into autopilot. They just done this before. It's not that exciting. They turn up for the photo shoot. But on my shoots, it's, the water is my domain and they kind of don't know what's happening and they're a little bit unnerved. And I, as an underwater scuba instructor, I kind of know what to say, how to help, how to make them feel comfortable, how to explain what we're doing, breathing, and to make them comfortable in the water and to not expect too much at the beginning. When you get, when you're anxious or afraid, your heart rate increases, which is absolutely rubbish for holding your breath, for example. So in the beginning of a shoot, I might find the model or the celebrity can't hold their breath at all, really, because they're quite like anxious and but once you relax with it, that's when the photographs start to, then you really start to pull them in because somebody is just confident in their own ability.
And have you had people who just can't do it, who just lose it?
No, not really. As a scuba instructor, there were people who I sent out of the water because they were rubbish and just bolting for the surface and being dangerous. And I'm not teaching you, mate. Yeah. So no, you're back on the boat. But when you're in a pool environment or an underwater studio, there are always ways that you can make it work.
You contrasted this, Katie Price, Tom Daley, people like Fern Cotton, people like that, with a project about Britain's rivers. You made this film about the River Dower. in Dover, showing what a catastrophic condition chalk streams were in. I mean, was that a personal project? How did you dovetail this kind of high-end fashion and celebrity with eco-consciousness?
Yeah, so I wasn't really dovetailing it very well. It was more of actually, I want to do that project because that's a story worth telling. And I always feel that when I'm underwater with a camera, I'm seeing things that other people should be seeing, but don't have the privilege really to be down there with me. So you always want to report back what you're showing. And I approached that river project with a view that I wanted to make something beautiful from our rivers, because our rivers are the Amazon rainforest of the UK. They are the haven for wildlife. But when I got into the river with the camera, I realized actually it was a really different scenario, and the water was hiding a lot of rubbish that was just shamefully down there. And I went to one bridge and there were 4 bikes that many people had just thrown over. And that was just typical. And then it started to be a story about these hidden rivers of Britain and how, all this rubbish is poured into them. And, water isn't a way for people. People feel that because they can't see it, they put it in the river, they can't see it. So it's not there. But actually it's very far from that. The water, all that stuff just ends up in the ocean because that's where it will end up eventually. So yeah, I wanted to tell that story. And I didn't want to put any more air miles on the clock, traveling around the world, shooting in wonderful locations. I wanted to do something that was very local.
Yeah.
And so that's how I came to the River Project.
It must be quite glamorous, I'm guessing, hanging out with Kylie Minogue. Do you miss all that?
No.
Yeah.
No, I'd much rather be growing roots.
Good.
It's actually not very glamorous because normally I'm really just wet. I look a bit like a drowned rat and I'm probably shivering because it's quite chilly. So yeah, it might look glamorous, but it really isn't.
I completely take that on board. I think that makes complete sense. Zena, our time is nearly up. So it's the kind of standard final question. What can we expect from you in the future? I mean, both in the near future, what have you got coming up? I mean, that's a good plug for anything you might have happening, but also, down the line, what can we expect from you?
So I'm collaborating with some designers now, which is very exciting. Phoebe English, Rachel Frere, Filippo Nossetti, and I'm using the route to create new materials, new fashion pieces. And V&A Dundee are going to be exhibiting some pieces early next year under their Garden Futures exhibit, I think that's what it's called. How
did you come across those particular designers? Were you put together or did you choose each other?
So I was very lucky to be awarded the UK Innovate Creative Catalyst grant for R&D. And through that is an opportunity to search out designers. And so I approached a number of people, and Phoebe English and Rachel Frere were one of them. And then through the umbrella of the Quest Scholarship, I worked with Filippo Nossetti, who is a fantastic lecturer at the Bartlett School of Architecture, and he works with computational design. And he's been able to help me develop the template making process in order to kind of push the boundaries of this material so that I can use 3D printed templates in a tessellation duplicated in beeswax. It's kind of like going beyond the technology of 3D printing because 3D printing is limited by printing in plastics. But if you can print a tessellation, duplicate it in beeswax, and then grow a natural fiber onto it, then you're in a really interesting place of being able to use computational design in order to design a natural fiber. So that's a very interesting process for me as well.
That is. How far down the line are you with that process?
I've got another few weeks to spend with him. And again, that will be ready kind of early next year, I think.
Okay. I'm fascinated now. Well, I was fascinated before, but I'm particularly fascinated now. I mean, do you have products that are coming out that you can tell us about at this stage?
I'm working on a jacket with Phoebe English. And I'm likely to be working on a dress with Rachel Frere. And the template structures that I'm designing with Filippo can be any of those things. I'm not quite sure what the template structure will be. So I don't have a product yet, but it's going to become something exciting.
Okay. So that's V&A Dundee. When is that?
It will be early next year, kind of like March, February time. I've forgotten the date.
So that's the near future, which sounds really very exciting and a good excuse to go to Dundee. Looking further ahead, What do you see? Where do you see Rootfull going?
I don't know, the goalposts keep moving, but I would like to continue crafting it as a material and exploring and experimenting what it can be in my studio. But I would also really like to collaborate with other designers and have their input. So I become a material innovator for them. So they tell me what to grow, and I can use my knowledge and experience of growing root in order to make sheet material or products or pieces or whatever that can be grown at scale for a different market.
Very good. Well, I look forward to all that happening. Zena, thank you so much for your time. I mean, we went from grassroots to Katie Price. I wasn't expecting that, and I'm sure my listeners weren't either. I have had a lovely time. Really appreciate your time. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
You can find out more about Zena and Rootfull at rootfull.com. As ever, to find other podcasts that I've done and to sign up to our newsletter, go to materialmatters.design. And there are images relating to the interviews on our Instagram page, which is also materialmatters.design. Oh, incidentally, you can find the show on YouTube Music now, as well as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and a host of other places. There's absolutely no excuse not to listen. And it would make me incredibly happy if you went to my Patreon page and made a pledge at patreon.com/Material Matters. For as little as £2.50 a month, you can receive an invite to various Material Matters events, as well as getting access to each episode before it's published to the wider world. Material Matters is a completely independent concern, and any help you can offer would be hugely appreciated. Ultimately, you'll be helping to take the message of the importance of materials, skill, craft, and design to a whole new audience. Thanks very much for listening.